Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and the national co-coordinator for the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. And this is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Sérgio Ferreira. I've known Sérgio for many years. He is a wonderful person and a dear friend. Over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to meet many interesting people, many of whom have lived fascinating lives. Sérgio is no exception. He served as the official interpreter for President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva during his 2 terms in office. And tonight we're going to talk about that experience and another aspect of his life, namely his work as a human rights activist, supporting the efforts to search for the whereabouts of those who resisted the military dictatorship and were disappeared by state agents. So let's go to the interview. Welcome, Sérgio, to Brazil Unfiltered. And I'm really glad that you're here tonight with us on this program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sérgio, you have a very interesting life, and we're going to jump right into something that many people recognize you for, which is the interpreter for Lula during his 8 years in government. What was it like to be Lula's interpreter?
Well, actually, I've been his interpreter for 28 years. So before the presidency, during the presidency, and even after the presidency when he was in jail. So I've been working with him all this period. And of course, the 8 years was very exciting. He undertook what some academic people call presidential diplomacy. So he was very proactive. And I traveled 85 countries with him. It was even East Timor, wherever you can imagine, 25 countries in Africa. He's the first president of the Republic in Brazil to visit Arab countries. So it was really very exciting.
And what is it like to work with him as an individual? What is it like as a human being?
As a human being, he's very funny. He doesn't get annoyed or disturbed by any kind of environment. So it's amazing. So we went to the first time Brazil was ever invited to a G8 meeting. It was President Chirac from France who invited him to attend the G8 meeting. And Brazil had never had such an invitation. So we went to the G8 meeting in Evian, France, and that was the same Lula that was at the White House with President Bush, and the same Lula that's with the labor unionists in a meeting or with NGOs at the World Social Forum. He was the only president, only head of state in the world that attended both the Socioeconomic Forum and then the Economic Forum in Davos. So he's the only one. So, but he's always the same person, or with President Obama, or is he with the King of Saudi Arabia, or with Queen Elizabeth, where we stayed 3 days at the Buckingham Palace. It's always the same Lula. Very funny, very sharp, very proactive, but at the same time, very calm and very balanced.
And was there a moment that you particularly comes to mind that stands out in terms of the time traveling with him internationally that
well, you can imagine 80 years, 85 countries. There's a lot of things that stand out, but I would say that one was his relationship with Bush. This would be the interest of our listeners from the US. Everybody thought that Lula in the US, a lot of people thought, oh, this is the new Chavez. This is the new evil triangle, which was Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea. So Lula was seen as such a character, a leftist. That's how the press calls him, a leftist. And so going to the White House to meet Bush, who was interested in the war against terror, preparing the US invasion with some allies to the Iraq, and then comes in Lula. And Lula and President Bush explains his war on terror, and he says, well, Mr. President, I understand your war, but my war is another one. My war is against hunger. So it wasn't an ideological speech. Brazil, during Lula's mandate, never joined the Bolivarian socialist movement. So we kept our independence in our foreign affairs. And that created, nobody could be against the hunger campaign. No one, not even Bush. So that was a surprise for Bush. There was no anti-American or anti-imperialist kind of discourse coming from Lula. And so they started to have very good relationship. And so I would stand out this relationship with the US because in 150 years of records of US-Brazil diplomatic relations, you never had a summit meeting of the cabinet of Brazil with the cabinet in the US. That never happened in the history, in 150 years. It only happened once, and that was on June the 20th of 2003. And we had this summit meeting at the White House, a one-day meeting with 10 cabinet ministers from Bush and from our side. And that was the only time that happened in the history of Brazil-US relations. So that's one thing that I would say that stands out, because Bush said, oh, I don't believe in these big meetings. I believe in face-to-face relations. And he confirmed the meeting because Itamaraty thought, oh, he's going to suspend the meeting because Brazil made a public statement against the Iraq war, but didn't mention the US government. It just said, we're against war, we're in favor of peace, everything should be done through negotiations and diplomatic means. That was the public statement from our government in March 2003. So that's one highlight, I would say. A so-called leftist president from Brazil managed to have one of the best ever relationships with a US president in our history. So that's something unique. And that is due to Lula's talent of dodging ideological issues. Well, Bush was the representative of the right-wing forces in the world in those days. And so that was an incredible stunt, let's call it like that, by Lula, this is remarkable, the way he deals with. And then many academics, scholars from the US said to me, oh, everywhere you go, you stumble into Brazil. And so that was Julia Swag that said that to me. And she's from the Council of Foreign Relations. She said, so Lula put Brazil on the map.
There's no question about that. It certainly was the case for people who were teaching the history of Brazil or Brazilian studies, that people became very interested in learning about Brazil. Language acquisition of Portuguese increased, real interest in the country. And I think that's going to happen again should Lula be elected president in 2023. What was your impression of his recent European trip?
Just before that, I'd just like to mention a second point that stood out in his international affairs was the Iran case, the deal between the nuclear deal that Brazil managed to achieve with Iran together with Turkey and Iran. So that upset President Obama. And the US said, no, you can't, you're going to be fooled by the Iranians. They don't want a deal and all that. And everything that the US government demanded to accept a deal, that's what we got. So it was, I believe in my lifetime, it was the first time that Brazil came out in CNN developing story. So CNN was giving that report about what was going on in Iran about this deal that we managed to sign. It took a long time, very difficult. Lula had to go personally there. The Prime Minister, Erdogan, was there too to get this deal signed. And on the next day, Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State Department, proposed sanctions against Iran. So they didn't even wait 24 hours. The US government didn't even wait 24 hours to at least examine the deal. They didn't do it. And then it took like another year and a half for Obama finally making a deal with Iran, but it doesn't have the same bar. It didn't reach the bar that we managed to reach with the Iranians. Our deal was much better. So I would say that these are the two most important things, I believe. Besides the relationship with Europe and then with the Arabs, it would take us all night if I start mentioning. It's absolutely crazy what we did in terms of international affairs in those years. So that's it. Now going about this recent trip, well, yes, I think it was a great success. And once again, Lula is just a citizen. He's not even the head of the party, of his political party. He's not. So just as a simple Brazilian citizen, former president of Brazil, he was received by the future chancellor of Germany. He was received by the president of France, and he was received by the president of the Spanish government. So that was amazing. And in France, it was even more because it was the Republican Guard and all that stuff. So yeah, I think it was a great success. It showed very clearly that big European countries, they don't mind about Bolsonaro. Because the diplomatic protocol, this is quite another stunt from Lula, because diplomatic protocol says an incumbent head of government does not receive an opposition candidate. Lula will be probably an opposition candidate for the incumbent Brazilian president against. So the protocol says in diplomacy, you don't receive that. And they did. The Spanish government did, the French government did, and the future German government did.
Why do you think they made that decision?
Sorry?
Why do you think they made that decision to receive Lula?
Well, I don't know. There are many reasons. One is to show, it's a showcase against Bolsonaro. I don't think there's no question about that. There's no way that France can relate with the Bolsonaro government the way what happened in the Paris Agreement, what happened at COP26, everything, the comments of our finance minister about Macron's wife, that she's ugly. It's absurd. It's not even worthwhile for us to mention what Bolsonaro and his government people have been doing. So I think that it was a recognition, it was an acknowledgement of all the achievements of Lula in the past. It was also a way to sponge all the Lava Jato scandal that the mainstream media replicated what our media was saying here. And that's what's the international media they do. They're very lazy. These correspondents, they live in Rio, and they just replicate what our newspapers and TV stations say. They don't do their own research, with the exception of Greenwald. That's a fantastic American journalist here in Brazil, because he does his own digging, he does his own investigation. But the others, the correspondents, Newsweek, Washington Post, Time, they just replicate what our mainstream media says. So I think that was a great acknowledgement of the importance of Brazil, the size of Brazil, the rainfall, the environmental issues, everything that Brazil carries with it, and plus a very special homage to Lula for what he did for his achievements in the past. And of course, naturally, obviously, the future prospects that he could be elected next year, the president, and then he will visit or revisit once again these countries as the president of Brazil if he's elected.
And what will be his challenges, you think, if he is elected president?
Many challenges. First, on the economic front, that's going to be a big challenge, because our Congress, which is very reactionary now, very conservative Congress, and with crony politics, they just passed a law that made the central bank independent. So I think one of the first things is going to be a confrontation in the economic front, where Lula will try to set up some social programs, welfare programs, try to put back our industrial sector on track. Brazil is undergoing deindustrialization since the neoliberal Washington consensus. Since the 90s, we've been going through a deindustrialization process. And so to do what he intends to do, to create jobs, we need to create jobs. We have 13 million people unemployed in Brazil, plus 5 million that don't even look for a job. So we're talking about 20 million people, plus others that are underpaid, precarious work and all that. So I believe that the economic measures that Lula may be thinking, maybe the central bank will not help. If the inflation continues to go up as it is, then they're going to put the interest rates up in the skies, and that will create a conflict. So the economics will be a big issue. How to create jobs under this new globalized world and all that. That's one thing. Then there's going to be a political challenge, because in Brazil we have this so-called presidential coalition political system. So it's a presidential system, but the Congress, as in the US, is very strong too. And although the Workers' Party still has the largest number of House representatives, our House has 513 members. So for you to get a majority that is diluted in 30 political parties, 30. In the US, we have 2 and plus 1 independent there and that's it. But here in Brazil, there's 30 political parties. And so that's going to be another challenge, very difficult one. That's to try to form a coalition, try to get support from the Congress, with these guys, these corrupt guys, these guys that are just thinking in their own parochial interests, it's going to be very difficult. So these, I think, are the two channels: the economic front on one side, unemployment and all that, and on the other side, the political front, how he's going to manage to deal with that.
Before we move on to questions about your activism as a human rights advocate in Brazil, and a very rich, long story to tell, I would be just curious to hear your reflections on what you think about the so-called third way, the alternative to Lula and Bolsonaro that the mainstream press has been promoting very hard recently. What do you think are the possibilities of a third candidate coming into the race and perhaps outpolling Bolsonaro in the first round of the elections, or a unification of different forces to oppose both Bolsonaro and Lula?
I think it's going to be very difficult because Bolsonaro, certainly he will continue a candidate. He's not going to give up. No way that he's going to give up. So what is happening is that on the center right, there are too many candidates. So there's Moro, there's Ciro Gomes, there's Simone Tebet, there's Rodrigo Pacheco, who is the Speaker of the House and the Senate, and there's now Doria. So there's like 5 to 7 candidates from the center right. And extreme right, there's Bolsonaro. So the right and the extreme right, they're too much splitted. Now, on the left side, we're not going to split. So PSOL, Bolos, or other more to the left, far to the left from the Workers' Party, they're going to support Lula. So that will give us a leverage because they're split up. So I think it's going to be very difficult. I think Moro, for example, okay, now it seems that he's going up a little bit on the polls. So he surpassed Ciro Gomes. All right, but he's going to split the Bolsonaro base. So how much he's going to be able to split a guy that was just a federal judge a year ago, never been to politics? Everything is possible in Brazil. You know that, Brazil. Brazil, as Tom Jobim used to say, our famous musician, it's not for beginners. So Brazil is not for beginners. So everything can happen, but I think it's going to be very difficult. I think Bolsonaro has 25% of support, and these are fanatics. They won't give up. So if he stays around 25%, he's already, for the runoff, he's already too strong. Lula's still leading the position. And so with the economy failing, there's not going to be a new Real plan again, nothing like that. There's no, Guedes is a disaster as a finance minister. Now they did this, they changed the Constitution, amended the Constitution. Just now, tonight, they passed something that is absolutely legal with the fiscal responsibility law. And they made an amendment just to not pay the government debt from the courts, just to get the money for the Auxílio Brazil Aid, which will replace the Bolsa Família, which was the family stipend program that Lula led and became an international reference. So I think it's going to be very difficult. Doria is São Paulo. Moro was a former judge. The Lava Jato thing was demoralized by Glenn Greenwald, by the hackers in the interior of São Paulo, that everybody saw the scam. Now coming out, denounced that Dallagnol, which was the main prosecutor, it got rich. And how did he get rich if he's a public servant? So there are many things. I don't think it's going to work. It could be, but it won't be easy. I'm not saying with that it's going to be, but I don't think a third way, a third alternative, I think it's very difficult.
So, and if Lula calls you back to be his interpreter, will you do it?
That's a hard one to answer because, working with military and with the diplomats was very difficult. I'm a NGO guy. I'm non-government guy. So for me to stay in government for 2 years and then I resigned from my position and just stayed as an interpreter for the rest of his term, it was very difficult. We're going to talk about it a little bit. I have my human rights record. And the military, which here in Brazil is a political police, they act as a political police. They know, they have my records. So it was very unpleasant for them to have me so close to the president. So they would see me whispering to the president, but I was just interpreting, but they could think this guy could influence the president. This guy's a dangerous guy. This guy's attacked the army, attacked the armed forces, denounced human rights violations and all that. So it made my life very hard to work there. I just stayed for Lula because he deserves it, because he's a metal worker. He has only fourth grade and a fantastic character that's been fighting all his life. So I just stay there. And I have my professional background, my political background, so I can fight these guys too, but it's not easy. So to go back again, if he invites me, if he's elected and all that, I'm going to have to think it over. And 20 years has passed. I was 50, now I'm 70. So this is also, I'm still energetic and all that. So I don't know. I'm going to have to demand certain conditions to go back. I can't go back like I did 20 years ago. It's going to have to be something different.
Before we return to the interview with Sérgio, I want to take a minute to ask those of you who can a favor. As an activist and a scholar, I've worked for over 40 years to increase awareness about Brazil. This is my life's work, and I will continue to do it as long as I can. However, producing this program is something I cannot do by myself. Please, if you can, support the workers who make this program possible at patreon.com/Brazil Unfiltered. Even $5 a month would go a long way and would help us to continue to come out with new material on a regular basis. If you're not in a position to donate, that's okay. Enjoy the program. Now let's return to the interview. So let's jump right into the question of your human rights activism. For our listeners, people listening to the podcast or watching the program, why don't you explain how you got involved in human rights activities?
All right. Well, in 1971, when I was 20 years old, I had a cousin who was underground. He was underground and he was fighting an armed struggle against the military dictatorship.
And his name?
And we were very close. Sorry?
His name?
Oh, his name, of course, Carlos Alberto Soares de Freitas. He was born in Minas Gerais. And by coincidence or not, I don't know, he's former President Dilma's mentor. So he's the one that recruited former President Dilma of Brazil from students movement to join students movement, as far to the left, to join an underground organization. And then she was arrested for that, was tortured and stayed in jail for 4 years. So that's a story that's very well known. So my cousin is former President Dilma's mentor, political mentor. So I was very close. He's the one that he was my mentor too, in terms of political education and all that, especially coming from the US. I lived in the US from 56 to 61. That were the golden years of Cold War. So when I came back, I had compositions against the island, and Mr. Khrushchev wanted to dominate the world through the island. I already called the island. It's a composition that I wrote in 1960 when I was 10 years old. So I came back to Brazil, and then I suddenly discovered that my cousin had been to Cuba in 1962, and he had a photograph with Fidel Castro. It was a shock. How can a family member can join the enemy? So he had this patience with me, and so I kept on getting older, and he took me to theater plays and showed me the other reality. He was very patient with me. So our friendship grew a lot. So even when he was underground, he was already underground for 4 years, I used to meet him. Although my family and our family banned him because it would be very dangerous to meet him, I continued to meet him even when he was underground. Then he was arrested, and then he disappeared, vanished. We issued a habeas corpus. It was denied by the military forces. They said, no, he was never arrested. And so in 1974, I went to Amnesty International headquarters in London. And they had just released a report on 10 years of torture in Brazil. It was 1974, 1964, 10 years of the dictatorship. They released this report. And that's through this torture report on Brazil that I found out that my cousin had died under torture. And then suddenly a name shows up. Inês Etienne Romeu witnessed his death. I was shocked. First, I was actually finding out what happened to him in 1974. He was arrested in 71 in London. And then I found out that this woman, which I never heard of, had witnessed his death. So I came back to Brazil, talked to the brother of my cousin, and he said, no, we know her, but she's under the national security law. She's in jail. She's locked up in jail. No one can visit. So it took me some years, 1978, to finally I can be, when we started the amnesty campaign, which I participated very actively. So it was in July 1978 that I managed to visit the political prisoner Inês Etienne Romeu, who at the amnesty report of 74 had said that she witnessed his death. Then when I visited her, I found out that no, she did not witness his death. But on the other hand, she started to talk about this underground place that she stayed. She wasn't in the army barracks. She wasn't under our FBI or in some prison. No, she was, when she was arrested, she was kidnapped, and she herself disappeared for 99 days. She was taken to some house, someplace up the mountains outside Rio. And she said to me, look, the torturers told me what happened to your cousin, because there was some guy from Minas. They're all from Minas Gerais, the state of Minas Gerais. And the guy said, oh, your friend was here. So that's how she found out that he died in that house.
So when Inês told you the story initially, when you visited her in prison, did she know that it was Petrópolis?
Oh, of course not. No, she just. So she didn't know where it was because she was blindfolded when they took her to the house. Yes.
Just for listeners to know, Petrópolis is a city in the mountains near Rio. It was actually the seat of the summer residency of the emperor in the 19th century. And it's a very pleasant mountain city with beautiful houses from the 19th century. So she was arrested. They blindfolded her and took her somewhere. She knew it was in the mountains. How did she know it was in the mountains?
No, but I have to complete a little bit. So she was arrested in São Paulo, and then she was tortured for 24 hours to say something important. She had one important thing that she couldn't tell them, which was Herbert Daniel, another activist, which you wrote a wonderful book. And Herbert Daniel was in the same safe house, the same secret house that she was staying. She went for a meeting in São Paulo, and she told him, if I don't come back at 11 p.m. on the same day, because São Paulo to Rio is 6 hours drive, you leave this apartment. And she was arrested. She didn't say where he was. She was tortured for 24 hours. Years later, Herbert Daniel said, I couldn't believe that you were arrested, so I stayed another 48 hours at that house. Crazy. And she never said where the house was, where Herbert Daniel was there. And so she was tortured by Fleury, a notorious policeman that used to torture political opponents of the government, brought to Rio. And then she planned herself. She said she had an important meeting on the street. So they released her, but everything was surrounded by the police. And then she just jumped in front of a bus because she preferred to kill herself than to be tortured and say something to the military. And so she was taken to a hospital, and they thought she was going to die. And then she woke up. And since she started yelling to the doctors, they want to kill me. I'm a terrorist. She said she wasn't going to say a revolutionary because no one would understand nurses. And so she said she was a terrorist. And terrorists, everybody would know because it was these posters around the cities about these terrible terrorists. So she was taken to the army hospital to recover a little bit from the bus hit that she got. And then from the army hospital, she was put in a car, blindfolded, in a blanket. And then she saw that from Rio is flat. Rio is a flat city. It has a lot of mountains, but the city is flat with mountains. She saw that the car started to go up. So it must be up in the mountains. So it could be Petrópolis, it could be Friburgo, it could be Teresópolis. Petrópolis is not the only mountain city near Rio. There's this whole mountain range area near Rio. So she said to me, look, I think it's one of these three cities. And then I have a phone number. Once she listened, they said the phone rang, and some of the torturers said, oh, this is 4285. It was just 4 digits. And she kept that in her mind. She listened to that. It's a long story that we won't have the time to explain, but I told her, okay, so I'm going to investigate. So let's see. I'll start with Petropolis. So she also, another thing that she kept noticing is that the guy that lent one of his houses to the army, he visited her twice. So she saw him face by face. And why did he visit her? How could they let her see someone that was not from the torturers themselves, the people from the army that were torturing her and all that? Because everybody in this house died. She's the only survivor. So for him to get to know the owner of the house, it was no big deal because the odds that she would survive were 0.1. So she fooled the guys. She said she's going to work for the secret police of the army, that she would be a collaborator. She would work for them. And so they split themselves. Some said we should kill her, and others believed that she would work for them. And that's how she managed to get out of the house. And as soon as she gets out of the house, she manages to denounce what happened to her, and then the family and friends. She was taken to Minas Gerais. The things got out of control. And after months in a hospital, in a private hospital, they finally arrested her officially. She was arrested by the order of the army minister, because in those days we didn't have a defense ministry as you have in the US, DOD, and in Brazil we have now defense ministry. In those days, the commanders of the army, Air Force, and Navy were ministers, were state ministers. And so she was arrested by the army minister himself, Orlando Geisel, who was the brother of the future president, Ernesto Geisel. So that's how she managed, that's how we more or less discovered the house. She kept note of the name of the guy, Mario, and I checked his IRS when I found, and then I went to the phone list. Petropolis is a small town, relatively speaking, so it doesn't have that yellow book. In the old days, right, Jim? We had that yellow book to find some address, commercial. So I went to look at each phone number of that phone catalog, and there was that number. They hadn't changed. It was 1976. The phone catalog that I was researching was 1976. So they kept the same phone. They were so easy. They were so comfortable that they would never be discovered that they didn't even change the phone number of the house.
And his name was connected to that telephone number.
His name?
No.
It's a private house. It doesn't belong to the government. It's not even a safe house for the government or secret police or the army, whatever. No, it's a private house that a guy whose father was the treasurer of the Nazi movement in Brazil in the 30s, who was arrested twice because he was a Nazi supporter. And this is his son, who decided, yes, graciously grant to the army a house so that they can take political prisoners, torture, do whatever they wish to do, eliminate them, kill them, and disappear with them. And no one would know. There would be no eyewitness, because this is a very small intelligence group of the army that had this house, that had control of this house. So if you were arrested and taken to the army barracks or to some other political prison, other people could be witness. They took to this house only those that they thought that they could either make them flip or eliminate them because they're leaders, and there's no way that these people could, so they would kill these people more easily.
And this was later known as by activists as the House of Death.
House of Death, yes. When the announcement came out in the press in 1981, so 10 years after she was taken to that house, with the National Bar Association of Brazil, the press, and the family members of those political prisoners that were tortured and killed and disappeared from that house. This is the group that we went and denounced that house, and it came out in the papers. It was a national scandal. And for the first time, the military in Brazil, and this was still military government, we're talking about 1981. It was Figueiredo, General Figueiredo's term. It was the first time that the Army, Navy, and Air Force did not deny, because they always denied, and you know that very well, they always denied there was torture in Brazil. That was something the left that make these denouncements. It was the first time that they did not deny the torture, but they said that was a revenge, that the blanket of amnesty should cover all these human rights violations. So Inês was not doing good for Brazil. She was doing bad. I'll bring back human rights issues that happened during a war, what the military call war period. It was armed struggle. And so it was the army against guerrilla in Brazil. So that they called it a war. And in the war, everything happens. So they said it was a revenge, but they did not deny. It was impossible for them to deny the existence of the house.
And how many people probably died in the house?
13, more or less. That she has knowledge. We could be much more. Could be much more. We have 150 missing political prisoners. So, and they kept that house from 1971 to 74. So we have 10 people from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Brazil. Some of them could have been taken to that house. We have other missing people that could have been taken to that house. So from Inês' statement, from her investigation for what she heard, and some of them she actually saw. There was one that she saw. He stayed in the house for a month. And so what she knows is 13 people, but there could be more.
And so what do you know happened to your cousin?
Well, he was arrested in February of 1971. 3 people were arrested in this day. 2 were tortured and killed, and 1 survived. So we have the survival of the last person that saw my cousin alive, but he was not taken to the house. And the other one, we have no information. And my cousin, we only know that he was taken to the house because of Inês, because she was there. And that's what the torturers told her. They told her that he was tortured. And so they said he was a leader, that they have to eliminate. And so what they told her, that he was executed there was a shot on his head. That's what they told her. But we can't rely 100% on what the military say. But in this case, there would be no reason for them to lie, because the chances for Inês, the odds for Inês to come out alive at that house was minimal.
In many countries in South America, after military dictatorships, there were truth commissions that took place relatively soon after the military was ousted from power. In some places, such as Argentina, the military who were involved in human rights violations were actually imprisoned and served time in prison, many of them long terms in prison. That didn't happen in Brazil. Can you explain to our listeners a little bit about why that didn't happen in the law of amnesty of 1979?
There's a lot of discussion about that. And there's a lot of misinterpretation about what happened. We started the struggle for amnesty in 1975, 11 years after the dictatorship. But it didn't take off because it was very difficult under a military dictatorship to undertake political action. You have Las Locas, das Madres de Mayo, the so-called crazy mothers of the May Square in Buenos Aires that were very brave, very courageous, and they did that street demonstration every week in Buenos Aires. We didn't have that kind of force in Brazil. Now, in 78, we did manage to start the left to reorganize itself, union movement, many things started to change in Brazil in the civil society. And so we started the amnesty campaign. It was a very tough campaign because the military said they would not grant amnesty, but they didn't grant anything. This was a struggle. And this is the main misunderstanding about the amnesty law of 1974. How do you read that law? And
79.
So what happened, 1979. Yeah. So in 1979, there was a battle at the Congress, and there were 2 draft bills. So there were 2 draft bills that were going to go under vote on the Congress. One was ours from the opposition, the members of the opposition to Congress, and the civil society movements in the amnesty campaign, which was to grant full amnesty for all political opponents, but not for those that participated in torture. We would have to punish those that disappeared political prisoners. So that wasn't in our draft bill. Neither was in the draft bill of the government in an explicit way. What happened is that there were two draft bills. They went to the floor and we lost. And we didn't lose by many votes, but we lost. So the first thing to clarify, Jim, is that there was no pact. There was no agreement. There were 2 projects. There were 2 draft bills that were against each other at the Congress floor. We lost. And with that, even so we lost, we did make a lot of advancements, because those that committed what they used to call blood crimes, kidnapped ambassadors, the US ambassador was kidnapped. The first kidnapped US ambassador in the history was in Brazil in 1969. So what happened is that the military excluded those that committed so-called blood crimes, and Arabs, Daniel, was excluded from the amnesty bill, but they changed the national security law. And that was the trick. So they changed the national security law, and so the term started to go down. So Inês was convicted for life-term prison. She's the only woman in the history of Brazil that was convicted for life-term prison. Then it went down to 30 years, and then it went down to 15 years. And so that's what happened. And so everybody came back from exile. Everybody left the prisons because of the amnesty campaign on one side, and because they changed the national security laws, because of also the amnesty campaign on our side. But what happened is that slowly, our political transition, there was very much in the academic world, a lot of scholars, even in the US, were studying the transition in the Southern Cone and all that. And in Brazil, it was very slow motion. So if you look and see that in 79, we had the amnesty, but the presidential elections are only going to happen 10 years after the amnesty law in 1989. So we had a very long political transition. The military fought back. They didn't want to leave power. And they left power only in 1985. And by indirect elections, electoral college that only the Congress voted. And so we managed to elect Tancredo Neves. And these very moderate opposition forces, they didn't want to pick up a fight with the army. They also thought, no, it's better for us. We had the amnesty law. So the famous Brazilian political opponents came back to Brazil, Brizola, Arraes, and all that kind of people. So they said, this is fine. This is going to work. Let's leave the past to the past. So what we have here is a split amongst the opposition forces saying, no, human rights issues is something of the past. The amnesty law, the amnesty bill has put a sponge. And that's the same discourse of the military that didn't want to have the truth coming out. Because if the truth came out, they would be like the French army did in Argel, in Algeria. And so they would have that. Or you have to go to the US Army and see what happened in Vietnam War. So these issues with the armed forces is always touching in any country in the world. And so our moderate opposition force, different from Alfonsín, who was the first president-elect of Argentina, he had he also made some compromises, but the Argentinians, as you said very well, and then with the Kirchners, they moved on very much, but not here in Brazil. And so our transition was very slow motion, and the human rights issue became something that bothered people. No, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the new political parties. Let's talk about a new constitution. And so we started to move to another political agenda. Direta já. We wanted to elect the president, one vote, one man, one vote. We lost in 84. It's the same thing with the amnesty bill. Direta já, the Dante bill, draft bill, lost. So it was a huge campaign, the largest mass political campaign in the history of Brazil. You put 1 million people in São Paulo, Rio, in the streets, but we lost. So as we lost the amnesty bill, we got a partial amnesty, and we didn't never get to punish the torturers. That didn't come out either. Of course not. Our bill had punished the torture. We lost that. We lost the presidential elections too. And so that's one of the reasons. The other reason, which is much more delicate, but I am not afraid to say so, is that the left abandoned the struggle. The left-wing forces in Brazil, and the main opposition party, the main left party in Brazil, which is the Workers' Party, they abandoned that fight. They didn't want to deal with it because that's something that brings issues. It's going to raise issues with the armed forces. It's going to raise issues with the conservatives, with the businessmen. Business companies were involved in torture in Brazil. We just had now a deal with Germany. I don't know if you heard about it. Metal workers from Volkswagen. They got a deal of reparation from the German Volkswagen headquarters. Say, yes, we did participate in the torture and with the police. We did this and that. So red-baited workers and all that. So that's the difference between Chile and Argentina and other countries, Uruguay, because part of our opposition forces, the moderate ones, and even those in the left, they decided to move on to another political agenda, and that's a great mistake.
So in 2010, I believe, 9 or 10, yes, President Rousseff sanctioned a provision to set up a truth commission that was established in 2012 and operated until 2014. You were involved, I believe, in activities connected to the Truth Commission, and also later in trying to turn the House of Death in Petrópolis into a national memorial or a monument, to a memory site for what happened. Could you tell us a little about what that has been?
No, the idea of a draft bill on a Truth Commission, that came out during Lula's term.
Under the minister of Vanucci, Paulo Vanucci.
Yes. So that was at the end of 2010. President Dilma took office on January the 1st of 2011. So with that proposition that was there standing at the president's office, she sent it to the Congress, and then the Congress, even moderate political forces, this time supported the Truth Commission. And so that was established in 2012 and lasted till 2014. But there are many problems with this Truth Commission. It's completely different from the South African case, because in the South African case, Mandela wanted to avoid a civil war in South Africa. So when he set up the Reconciliation and Truth Commission, what was the deal? The deal was the following. Torturers, people that were involved in torture, they had to go to the stand, and they would have to tell the truth. If they said the truth, they would not be punished. They would not be charged. They would not be prosecuted. Now, if they lied in front of the Truth Commission in South Africa, then they would be prosecuted. They would be arrested. So they did it, very intelligent Mandela. He did it the other way around. You tell the truth, you get out free. If you lie, we put you in jail. So that was the trick. Very good idea that in South Africa, what happened. And so all the stories, Steve Biko, everything, all those political crimes in South Africa came known because of the Truth Commission. But in Brazil, the way we set up the Truth Commission, it started already weak. It was not empowered. It did not have the force to call the federal police to bring in witnesses. Witnesses could not be charged, could not be prosecuted. So there were so many limits to what they could actually do in the time frame, because the Congress approved it, but they said, no, they have to go back to 1945. No, the idea of the Truth Commission was just to analyze the military dictatorship period, which was 64 to 85. And so everything they did to really make it difficult for the Truth Commission. So it was very poor. Our assessment, when I say our, I'm talking about, I belong to a group of families of missing political prisoners. And we've been active all these years. We haven't given up. Even if the left left this agenda, we still have a strong group of militants, activists that are still struggling for this. And we managed to strive. So Fernando Henrique Cardoso, he had to enact a new bill, 9,940, which enlarged the amnesty bill of 1979. And so he gave money reparation. He published a list of 150 missing political prisoners that the state recognizes that it had responsibility for this disappearance. Nevertheless, all these advances, we never managed to get to prosecute any military involved in torture. There was no way. And the Truth Commission didn't have that power. It had the power to raise stories, to listen, but a lot of people showed up. Because a lot of people say, oh, in Argentina, it's different. In Argentina, it's because 20,000 people are missing in Argentina. And in Brazil, it's only 150. And there's only 500 people that were murdered in Brazil during the military dictatorship. You can't measure that in numbers. Like an old saying that I like from the US left, an injury to one is an injury to all. So you can't measure the life of a person by numbers. And so that's one of the problems that we have with the Truth Commission. But nevertheless, 60,000 people showed up to tell a story and to ask for reparation. 60,000. And I know many friends, many activists that didn't show up because they said, I was in a struggle. I don't need this. I don't need reparation. I don't need. So we don't know. We don't have these numbers. So it's very difficult for you to say, some scholars say, there was people support during the military dictatorship. How can you measure that? How can you go out and interview people and people would actually say, no, yes, I'm against that guy. So all those research by Sérgio, where I did my master's in political science, they showed me these research. How do you actually think you can do a true research under that dictatorship? So the Truth Commission, nevertheless, I'm not such a critic as many of my brothers and sisters of our movement are. I think it was positive anyway. It's another move, a chessboard that we've been moving forward. And I think it condemned the military government. It called responsibility for all the generals that were president. It said that they were the ones that were responsible for torture in Brazil. So that came out very well. And like 1 or 2 years after that, the American, now I'm going to forget his name, so many names in my mind, a researcher that does on CIA documents from the US. He's based in Washington. Peter something is his
Peter
name.
Kornbluh.
Okay, Peter Kornbluh. He found out a CIA document that was just released where there's a meeting between the future president of Brazil, General Geisel, the head of the intelligence of the army, which was the guy responsible for the house in Petrópolis, Figueiredo, who would be the future president after Geisel, and who was the head of another information body, and the future head of the intelligence, the army. This meeting, I don't know how it leaked. This is a meeting of 4 people, but the CIA had the report. So I believe that maybe one of them, of course, gave the report to the CIA, or was it Figueiredo, or the head of intelligence, which should have some kind of relationship with CIA. So when this report came out, now too, because Geisel, many scholars that write about Brazilian history say, Geisel was the guy that ended torture in Brazil, moderate this, he did the political openness and all that. And so this CIA memorandum showed that he was, and goes up high in government. All the torture, the house of death, all this went high up in the ranks. So I think that's the difference that we had. So the Truth Commission, I think it was positive. We go step by step on this issue. And now, even now in March of this year, 2021, came out on an 8 o'clock news, Jornal Nacional Globo, came out that one of Inês' torturers, and that raped her twice, a guy that has this nickname called Camarada, he is now being prosecuted. He made an appeal to a higher court, federal justice court, and they denied him the appeal, and he's going to be prosecuted as Inês' rapist in that house. So we still got some things moving on. We're still moving on with the ball.
And what's the status of the attempt to get the space recognized as a memory site?
That is very difficult. We have a human rights group in Petrópolis that we support here, the human rights groups here in Rio. They managed to, the city council approved that it could become a memorial site. And then the next term of another group of city council, they moved it out. And now they're fighting back to try to put it again. So it's been a very hard fight. It's private property, and it's very difficult. As you said, it's an elite. It's a upper middle class that lives in Petropolis or travel there. It's a tourist site where the emperor used to say the summer, as you said, is a summer house, a summer palace. And so people don't want to relate Petropolis having a house of death. So it hasn't been easy to make it a memorial site.
So Sergio, as you remember so well, the day that the House voted for the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, a relatively unknown congressman got up and dedicated his vote to what he called the Revolution of 1964, that is the military coming to power, and to the colonel who oversaw the torture of Dilma Rousseff in São Paulo, as you had described. And that person later became the president of Brazil and is currently the president of Brazil. What do you think will be the impact of the way he has legitimized defense of the military regime and defended torturers in the future? What will be the impact if he is defeated in the elections in Brazil for those who still believe that the military was justified in coming to power in '64 and torturing oppositionists?
It has made some impact. He got us some support with this so-called patriotic ideas of dressing with the colors of our flag, yellow and green. I saw one of their demonstrations in São Paulo, and I was really amazed how many people asking for go back to AI-5, the dictatorial act, measure by government that put censorship, closed the Congress, everything. And so people are asking for that to come back. And they don't have the slightest idea, well, what was the dictatorship and all that. So it has a lot of destructive impact because, for example, even Cardoso, which was a moderate president, he set up this special committee for people that were dead and disappeared during the dictatorship. Comissão Especial de Mortos Desaparecidos. That is a commission, that is a state commission, so no government can end with it. So what Bolsonaro did was to dilute it. So it's not working, it's not functioning, it doesn't meet, put more army representative, it took out the families of disappeared political prisoners. So in the human rights issue, it's under attack by Bolsonaro. So he's been destroying, dismantling everything, all those achievements that we managed to reach, even though we didn't reach what we wanted to reach, like in Argentina and Chile. Bachelet opened a memorial site in Santiago, which everybody says it's wonderful. I haven't been there yet, but everybody says it's a superb museum that shows what happened during the dictatorship in Chile. And so the setbacks here in Brazil with Bolsonaro have been tremendous. And so I just hope that it was so absurd for him to show his vote for her impeachment, saying a good word about this Colonel Ustra, who was this torturer, very well-known torturer and all that, and was convicted by a lower court. He's one of the, it's very seldom that happens. If it happens, I would say that maybe he's the only case that was.
I think there were two cases, and unfortunately, it was only in civil. It was only a civil case because it couldn't be a criminal case, right?
Civil case. No, of course, civil case, criminal case, because of the interpretation of the amnesty bill. They say that's sponged. So these have been civil courts, right? But we also say that these human rights violations, they don't have a statute of statutory, they don't prescribe, they don't end. These are crimes for the humankind. So you have to investigate that. And we have a group in the justice system called the Justice of Transition Group, which is interesting. Some prosecutors are trying to move forward with some of these cases. That's what happened with the rapist, Inez Etienne's rapist, who was being prosecuted by a federal prosecutor in Petropolis, from Petropolis. That's interesting. There's two federal prosecutors in Petropolis that want to try to investigate the house of death. So that hasn't ended. That chapter hasn't ended. So what I usually say is that you can't put these things beneath the rug. we're in 2021. Don't we still read books? Don't we still see films on what happened in Germany and in Europe during the Second World War? So the Holocaust and all that. So these stories still come up. So I believe that in Brazil, since we didn't explain what happened, how it happened, who was involved, who are the responsible for these deaths, these tortures. So it's a never-ending story. Now,
Yeah,
I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I'm aging, and as it happened in Argentina, the abuelas, the grandmas, are passing away, and the grandmas and the mothers are also passing away. They age. So I'm concerned. But there's some young people. The Truth Commission, that was something good for the youth, for the young people, because many didn't have the slightest idea what had happened in Brazil 30 years before. So that was a shock. And now you have in the internet, Brazil Nunca Mais, that big project that Cardinal runs in São Paulo, that was an investigation on torture in Brazil. And that's online. You can read the whole investigate. The book, Torture Nevermore, was the title. And you have that. I'm the godfather of a Brazilian friend. She lives in New York City. And then she sent me a WhatsApp. Hey, Gindo, Godfather, did you know about this? And then she was showing me the Brazil Torture Nevermore. So she's 36, and her father's a filmmaker from the left, but she never knew about it. So I believe that these are all part of. We'll try to reclaim this struggle until I live to my last stage. Now I'm working on a documentary. We had a book about my cousin that you read it, and now we're working on a documentary, a film documentary. I already spoke to Dilma. She said it's wonderful. She's going to help and all that. So while we're still around here, we're a bunch of Brancaleone army, or we're a wild bunch, and there's no government that can tame us. So that we continue that.
Well, I think we're two spirits made of the same metal. I agree with you. I think you know that I got involved in Brazil largely through another person who was arrested and tortured in 1970 and came to the United States, Marcos Arruda, and we became friends through his sister. I want to thank you so much for sharing your life story, a little of your life story, your experiences. Let's hope you are working hard next year as the interpreter of the next president of the country on your own conditions. That will be wonderful. It will keep you young and energetic, no doubt. And I want to thank you very much, Sérgio, for joining us on Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Jim, to have this program, Brazil Unfiltered. It's a wonderful idea. Congratulations. And I was very happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much. I hope that you're enjoying the program. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. Also, tell your friends, colleagues, students, professors, or anyone else you can think of who might be interested in the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.